Jurassic Park, 1993 masterpiece from Steven Spielberg, a movie that sparked massive interest in dinosaurs and paleontology among children worldwide at the time, including myself, and was responsible for a significant influx of people selecting paleontology as their major at universities in the US in the following years. It's one of the most commercially successful movies of all time. I believe at this point it's made almost $1 billion, and about 250 million of that went straight to Steven Spielberg, which is the most money any individual ever has made on a single film. It also won 3 Oscars, visual effects, obviously, sound and sound editing. The film was based on a Michael Crichton novel, and interestingly, the novel was sold to Universal Studios before it was even finished. Just the pitch for it and an early manuscript was convincing enough to make Hollywood people believe that the film based on that novel would be a smash hit. And hey, they were right. The story, I'm sure we all know. A wealthy man figures out a way to clone dinosaurs out of DNA preserved inside of mosquitoes frozen in amber from the Jurassic period. He plans to open an amusement park with live dinosaurs as the attractions, but faces safety concerns from his shareholders. And so he invites a group of people, sort of an individual, let's say, council of assessors, including paleontologist Alan Grant, on a pre-opening tour of the park over the weekend so that they can watch the thing and then give their positive opinions. However, things quickly go south, and it turns out that Hammond's mantra, spared no expense, is not as true as he would have us believe. So I think this is the first time I've revisited this film as an adult. I have seen it multiple times as a kid, and I remembered it quite vividly, as it turns out. And in my opinion, 30 years on, it's still fantastic, and I mean, as fantastic as it ever was. But here are some takeaways that I had this time around. First of all, the special effects still hold up remarkably well. In fact, they don't just hold up, they look fantastic, even in the modern day. I've seen movies released in the past 2 years or so that had worse visual effects. Now, I think that comes down to a couple of things. First off, the actual CG work done by Industrial Light and Magic, the company responsible for Star Wars, amongst other things, was really top-notch and ahead of its time. But Spielberg was still very aware of the limitations of computer-generated imagery and the cost of CG, and so there's not as much of it in the film as you would perhaps believe. Basically, the wide shots with the entire big dinosaurs in them are CG. But whenever we see just parts of the dinos, the head or just the legs, or in the case of the raptors, very often almost their entire bodies, that is not CG. Those are mechanical puppets, physical robots. And this means a couple of things. The actors give way better performances because they have something physical with them to act against and to react to. And the dinos themselves automatically look more realistic just by the virtue of being physical models. They have better texture to their skin, and they have weight, and there is no trouble with lighting them. And also Spielberg goes even 2 steps further with sort of, cheating the audience and walking around potential problems. One, he often shoots in the dark. He shoots dinos in the dark, or in the rain, or behind foliage. And apart from a couple of memorable money shots where the CG budget went, he is very clearly being scarce with utilizing the dinos, which helps you not notice the imperfections. And 2, very often he builds tension by not even showing the dinos at all. The velociraptors themselves are a great presence felt throughout the film, but we don't actually see them until like 90 minutes in. And instead Spielberg shoots some of the scenes from the POV of the dinosaurs, with the camera shaking and moving around. And it makes us feel like we're with them, and it makes us feel we've seen them where we actually haven't. They haven't been on screen. Or the first appearance of T-Rex also comes to mind, the sound waves being shown on the water caps with the dinosaur's steps, which is a classic scene. And the amount of time that passes between when we realize something is coming and when we finally see the beast, it helps work around the limitations of filmmaking, but it also builds superb tension. It's something that I'm sure Spielberg took away from his work on Jaws, where he similarly had to refrain from using the shark too much because of technical problems with it, and instead he used it more as a presence, felt rather than seen. The result is, of course, that there is very little to nitpick about the film's visual side when you put all of those things together in Jurassic Park. Also, I love how the movie is not just horror. I mean, as tense and terrifying as some of the scenes are, there is also a lot of wonder and delight. I mean, the first Brachiosaurus scene with John Williams' music swelling up. It's just such a terrific and memorable scene. I mean, welcome to Jurassic Park. Another thing that comes to mind, that came to mind as I was watching the film, was how dinos were obviously the thing I remembered most from my childhood viewing, but the rest of the film around them is very, very competent. Pretty much every scene and line of dialogue forwards the plot. The pacing is excellent. There's a lot of seemingly unimportant details and things established early on that come to fruition, that have a major payoff in the second half of the film. The characters are very entertaining, not least because of the very charismatic cast. Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, Richard Attenborough, even Sam Jackson shows up in a small role. And even the kid actors are more than fine, which is a rarity. And I've read that the critics did have a problem with characters, with the character work at the time of the movie's release, claiming that they were mostly shallow and one-dimensional. And I'd say to an extent that's true, but in this particular movie it's not at all a problem, because it's a plot-driven narrative and not a character-driven one. So having the characters be simply drawn and easily defined helps moving the plot forward as well. One last thing, as a kid I liked the action scenes the most, and I was really annoyed whenever the film would slow down for the conversation scenes. But now as an adult I found those to be the most fascinating parts. All the discussions about the ethics and morality of playing God with resurrecting creatures and entire extinct species and ignoring the consequences of such actions. I think it's a really interesting discussion to have, and about the impacts of uncontrolled science, and I was glad to see it explored here. So all in all, it's a film that deservedly is considered a masterpiece, because it's really a well made adventure movie with elements of horror, sci-fi and ethics exploration thrown into it, which was also simply revolutionary in the field of visual effects, and hasn't really aged in the last 30 years that passed from its release. Worth revisiting every time.